Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for following Jesus. If we haven't met yet, my name is Tony, and I'm your host. With over a decade in the local church, I care deeply and passionately about helping you connect with Jesus in practical ways. Today's conversation is with a friend of mine, someone whose ministry I value and who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. I've been on his podcast, and it was time to bring him on mine because he got a brand new resource out called Now You Can Make Disciples. Mike Falkenstine is a pastor, he's a ministry leader, and he's been all over the world talking about the Great Commission. And you know I love the Great Commission. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Mike. If you do me a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. And the highest compliment you can give us, share this episode with a friend, maybe somebody who's thinking about making disciples. And now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Mike Falkenstine. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have a friend of mine. I think we've known each other now for just about a year. Fellow disciple maker,
That's right.
Author, speaker, and kind of the CEO and founder of 1-8 Catalyst, Mike Falkenstine. Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. It's always great to, I've had you on our ministry's podcast, and so now it's nice to be with you on yours. It's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's good, man. And I'm so excited to talk about this brand new resource that you've got out. Now You Can Make Disciples. It's a step-by-step guide. We're going to jump into all of that. But first and foremost, the question I love to ask people is, how would you define the overarching calling that God has placed on your life?
Well, that's a great question. So I think for me, I've always been a theology guy and a resource guy. And so, of the spiritual gifts that I think that God has given me, obviously I have the gift of faith, and, in the ESV anyway, it's called discerning between spirits, discernment. And so I really have been just captured by kind of discerning between truth and false, and, trying to, in fact, a lot of the teaching that I do is kind of based on, trying to always, pull people back towards biblical truth. So I would say really this overarching calling is really helping people grow spiritually in in biblical truth.
Yeah, let's drill down on that a little bit, because I think biblical truth is something that a lot of people are talking about right now. I feel like when I talk to pastors and church leaders, we're talking about worldview and biblical truth more so now than ever before. When do you think that our Christian culture lost sight of biblical truth and in doing so lost its biblical worldview?
It's a great question. It'd be fun to do a little research about that, actually, right? But certainly it seems like it's been kind of what I would call kind of a slow creep, right, towards, or rather away from, biblical truth, to where, I don't know, Tony, if you've seen recently, I wish I had the stats in front of me, but George Barna did a recent survey and study through Arizona Christian University, and then R.C. Sproul's ministry, together with Life Research, did a study on kind of this very thing and kind of American Christianity, where are we at? And it is really interesting because now it's only 51% of American pastors, evangelical pastors, have a biblical worldview. Something like 26% of evangelical Christians believe that the Bible is not the inspired Word of God. There's some research that indicates, and every time they do this study, I think it's every 5 years, it kind of gets those percentages get bigger and bigger. And so, So in terms of when exactly it happened, I don't know, but certainly you can take even just the studies that they're doing, and it indicates, yeah, we're getting, even in our churches, right? We're getting further and further away from a biblical worldview for sure.
The interesting thing that I'm making the connection now is that your mission 1-8 Catalyst is really based out of this calling for biblical truth. I'm wondering if you can kind of tell our friends listening, what is 1-8 Catalyst? How'd you come up with it? What's the genesis story behind this incredible mission?
Yeah. So most of my ministry career, so I've been in full-time ministry since 1994. And for much of that time, I was actually involved in impacting China. So I have a long history in China, serving the growth of the church in China. And so we started our ministry in 2005 in response to some needs that they were indicating they had. In particular, Bibles. They needed Bibles in rural China, and church building and theological training. As we were kind of closing those out, meaning that we were finding that there were fewer and fewer places in rural China that needed those resources. We began to, I think, because we were going further and further out, finding Christians in China who needed a Bible. We began to run across these unreached people groups in China, and God just really captured my heart around this idea that there are now 7,400 people groups around the world that are unreached or unengaged. They say that there are 2.2 billion people in the world who have never heard the gospel once. And then I began looking at the Western church to say, okay, church, how are you doing at actually reaching those people who so desperately need Jesus? And I just found a big chasm, a big gap between, not a lot of activity, not a lot of interest overall, and, reaching the unreached. And so I think for kind of our new stage of our ministry, we went through a big rebranding of our ministry to 1-8 Catalyst, this idea of creating resources and delivering training that's really helping people grow spiritually, but kind of this idea that people who are growing spiritually want to reach their world for Christ. So for some, it might just be reaching your neighbors. For some, it might be a regional ministry. And for some, you might be called to one of those 7,400 people groups. And so it really came from, I think, kind of trying to figure out this dichotomy between the Western church and the unreached, and how do we kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, before we were recording, we were talking about some of the global mission work that you're doing with the ministry and how it's like Indonesia, and they're translating resources in Swahili. I'm curious, from your kind of like vantage point, your expert opinion, what does the Western church have to learn or need to learn from places like Indonesia, China, and Africa that maybe most of us don't think about?
Wow, that's a great question. And I like it in particular because right towards the end of as our primary focus in China was changing, I was spending a lot of time in rural China. And, these villages in rural China, these guys, literally they're making, $2 a month equivalent or something like that. They have nothing physically. And yet these Christians in these rural areas were just so joyful and just so happy in Jesus, right? And so I had this idea. I didn't know how I was going to, work it out. But I thought, man, if I could spend 3 or 4 months in one of these villages and just kind of observe what these guys were, what made them so happy, because I do think there are things we can learn from them. And part of it is, that they have Jesus Christ but nothing materially, but really because they have Jesus, that's all they really need. And so I think for sure, one thing we could learn from them is to sort of, not focus so much on all the material things that we have and go deeper in our walk with the Lord, right? And we see this all around the world. I would guess the other main thing that I think about is as I have been now working in some other places, as you mentioned, we've got some resources of ours being translated into some other places. There are many other church leaders and Christians in other places have a very deep heart for evangelism. And, obviously when you have a deep heart for evangelism, that means that, you have something to share, right? When Christ has so transformed your own life that you say, man, I have got to tell someone about this Jesus. And, to where, again, one of the studies I saw recently, I think it was Lifeway Research, it was something like 65% of American Christians haven't shared Jesus with anyone, in the past year. And so, if you're not sharing Jesus, you're most likely just not on fire for him, or having, if you've got nothing to share as it relates to your walk, right? That probably indicates something about your walk. And so I guess that would be the other thing, is just, what Jesus has done in our lives on the cross, just kind of falling in love with him again, being thankful to him, and just kind of recapturing that deep heart for, for Christ and, for the lost. Because again, there's just people all around us who need Christ. So those are the two things that come to mind in particular.
Yeah, I love that. I think especially just, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that dependence, right? When we have nothing, we can depend on Christ for everything. That just becomes a much easier decision. When I've got resources to fix it on my own, I guess I'm tempted to fix it on your own.
That's right.
That's
right. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I appreciate about you is that with this new book and with all the things that you're doing, is that you're very responsive to what Christ has called you to. And so one of the questions that I love to ask people is, how do you discern Christ's voice? Like when he's like, okay, Mike, I want you to write a step-by-step guide for disciple making, or I want you to go to China, or I want you to go to Indonesia. Like, how do you know it's Christ and not the thought of like, man, I just want to go to Indonesia for a party, or, you know what I mean? Like, how do you know it's God's voice?
That's really a great question. And it's great because it does relate to disciple making, right? So in the early chapters of my new book, I actually we begin by sort of defining what is a disciple of Jesus, and then what is disciple making and discipleship and whatnot. And obviously one of the differences between just a Christian and a disciple of Jesus is that a disciple both listens to Jesus and learns from Jesus, and then finally a disciple of Jesus obeys Jesus, right? So one of the key things that I've just done for almost the whole time I've been in ministry is I have of course, I'm here in South Metro Denver, and so we just love being outside because it's just so nice to be outside here much of the year. And so Friday mornings from about 9 to noon, I have what I call an extended time with God, or time alone with God. We always call it a TOG. And so, part of it, I think, is just sort of, obviously it's hard to hear from Jesus and listen to Jesus if, we have what I always just call kind of the noise in our heads all the time, because we're all in the West. We're all just so busy and got a million things going on. And, so I often tell people that in that 2 or 3 hours that I spend on Fridays, and this is in addition to my regular, quiet times, but in that, a lot of times it's just the first hour that I'm just kind of trying to quiet the noise, and I'm trying not to think about those 3 projects I have to work on, or the fundraising calls, or the, any of the stuff. It's just kind of, okay, Jesus, it's just you and me time. And so I leave my my smartphone in the car, and I've got a little place where I go, and I can see kind of the front range of Colorado and the mountains, and I'm out there just, outside. And so that, of course, I would say would be foundational. It's just that you're not going to hear from him and then to be able to obey him unless you really are kind of unplugging from everything and, getting that time. And so, there are spiritual disciplines that I've learned, not only this time alone with God, but I'm a big, journal guy. So as I'm reading scripture and during these times, I'm also journaling and trying to pick up on certain themes or things that I think he's trying to say. And so that kind of pairs, I think, well then with, what open doors that I see or closed doors that I see in my life. And the example I've been giving lately is, I mentioned earlier about this transition we made from China to, what we're doing now. And one of the things that kind of popped up on the radar early on was, there are, something like 89 of these unreached people groups just in China, and some 16 of them don't have any portion of the Bible translated into their language. And so after doing Bible distribution, I thought, it would be great to do some Bible translation work. And so I partnered with some of the key Bible translation work organizations, and it was just clear, both in I just never felt that, God releasing me to and telling me to do that. And on their side, there was just some issues. And so it was just really clear that was just never an open door. So we just kind of continued to move on to kind of the next thing. So I guess, the time spent listening, learning, and then hopefully obeying, together with kind of looking at open and closed doors and see what God's doing.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Now, I know your heart and how burdened it is for disciple making. I'm curious if you could kind of give us the backstory on when you first knew that you had to be someone who makes disciples, Where is this all born from? Because if we're honest, disciple making is not like the most attractive thing that Christians do. Most Christians don't do it, have never been discipled, and don't even know how to make disciples, which is why this resource is so important. How did it first come into your life? I think that there's a story with a navigator in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. So I was young guy in sort of my mid-20s and wasn't really sure, kind of, I had just become a Christian my senior year of high school. And so I was at Colorado State University, and I met a guy, Brad, who was a Navigator staff member, and he began. He asked me if I would be interested in meeting with him weekly, and this is really the first adult Christian guy who began to sort of invest in my life, and so we met for a couple of years, and I think the switch that was flipped, so to speak, or the spark that turned on was simply observing, his life and what he was investing his life in, and getting a strong sense that, that's really what I want to. That's how I want to invest my life as well. And so a lot of times, that's the case, right? It's that one person that invests in the life of another, and so that's really where it started. And then even while we were doing serving the growth of the church in China type work, I always had a guy or two back home that I was investing in, and so it's been a long time thing for me. I've had a heart for disciple making for a long time.
Hey guys, just pausing the conversation with Mike to remind you about the Spirit and Truth Conference coming up in Dayton, Ohio, March 9th through 11th. We are gathering some of the world's top speakers to help give you a fresh breath of the Holy Spirit. I'm so excited for this conference, what it means and what it can do for you. So, hey, think about joining us March 9th through 11th. You can use the code PODCAST when you check out. Save a little cash on that registration. We're so thankful for you. For more information, go to spiritandtruth.life/conference. Now let's finish up this conversation with Mike.
How important is relationships to disciple making? Because I hear you talking about being approached as a young man in your early 20s. You and I both have strong opinions on disciple making. Mm-hmm. What's someone who thinks I can just do this on my own? What kind of words do you have for them about disciple making and the importance of relationships?
Yeah. So, gosh, there might be a couple of things to say, right? So obviously, for the person, obviously the book that I just wrote is generally for the person who has never done this before, right? So someone who says, oh, I see this command that Jesus is giving in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples. I don't know how to do that, but I would like to. So I'm really taking them again, kind of step by step through that. And so I would say it's interesting when I first began gathering some notes for writing this book. One of the initial questions I had for those who had discipled me in the past, and we've maintained a relationship, was: is it even possible? I mean, is it even possible for someone who has never been discipled to simply pick up a book and begin discipling others? Because, one of the key principles in disciple making, of course, is this, 2 Timothy 2:2 principle. So Paul is writing a letter to the young Timothy, and he says, "And the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will be able to teach others also." And so kind of baked into disciple making is this idea that it's unlikely that you're going to become a disciple maker unless you've been discipled yourself, right? And so the answer that I got back from these mentors was, well, good question, because it's a legitimate one, but probably if someone had the heart to do it, your book could be the catalyst that could help them actually do it. Even if it was the first time or two they tried it, they're making all kinds of mistakes. They can learn from those mistakes and they can get on it. So obviously it's best, I will say that it is best to have been discipled by someone else first before you attempt to invest in another person's life, right? So, and then the other key part of relationships in disciple making, I would say, is that as you're beginning this process of meeting with people weekly and you're helping them grow spiritually, eventually, part of the 2 Timothy 2:2 principle is that Timothy eventually, Paul's heart is that Timothy would have other people who would be able to invest in others. So we have kind of this 4 spiritual generations of people, right? So eventually you're going to actually want to meet with those people that you're discipling less, only because then they're meeting with people and that gives you a chance for you to meet with some new people. And, but you want to maintain that relationship because, let's say that, Timothy, in the 2 Timothy example, Timothy, I'm sure would love to be able to come back to Paul from time to time and say, gosh, I'm trying such and such and this isn't working and what do I do? And, and so you want to have those relationships, keep those relationships of those both that you've discipled and that have discipled you, because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a team here of disciple makers. And so the relationship doesn't go away. It just sort of changes over time, right? So that would be the other key thing, is that even if you've got your people that you've been discipling who are discipling others, maintain that relationship and let them know, hey, I got your back. I'm going to be here for you. we're still doing stuff together. I'm having you and your wife or whatever, your spouse over for dinner. We're still maintaining that relationship because now we're on the same team of disciple makers.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I really wanted to highlight with that question is that when you pick up a book like this, it's not meant for you to just read on your own and internalize without sharing it with another human, right? So while you may not have been discipled, this book is enough of a framework to give you, because you really do just go week by week and say, okay, this is what you can do next, and this is what you can do next, and this is what you can do next, and really lay out a plan. And while, some people, and we always want to be respectful to where people are, some people may need, more than 1 week in a particular chapter, the framework is really what's there. And if you are going to pick up a copy of this book, I want to encourage you to do so with the intent to use, right? That's right. Use this with another human, because that's how we make disciples. So the question to that is there are probably a lot of Christians listening right now who have never made disciples. And they would call themselves a faithful follower of Jesus. I think that you might have thoughts about that. Would you share them?
Yeah, well, it's always a somewhat of a delicate question, but I think that the Bible is really clear about it too. So on one hand, I never want to make someone who is a faithful follower of Jesus feel bad about necessarily what they have or haven't done. I mean, their journey and their walk is their journey and their walk, right? I would say that it's never too late, however, to take that faithful following of Jesus and begin using it to, help others to, be walking with Christ. And so, and that's really, it's interesting. When I first was in the early stages of writing this book, my idea was that it would be a lot of these new believers, right? A new believer who then says, oh, I want to share this with others and begin, doing this with others. But I think actually the core audience of the book actually is probably those people, right, who have just never done it. And actually how cool for them that they can start, because they're going to have a lot of experience following Jesus. And so to begin, it's never too late to begin, I guess, is my thought about that. And then I would say maybe finally that, one of the, as you know, Tony, one of the key sort of veins of theology that we're going through in our ministry is this idea that, there, as we've done the research, there are these commands of Jesus that we see. There's some 50 commands of Jesus altogether. Two of them are, Mark 16:15, it says, go proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. And then again in Matthew 28, go make disciples. And these are commands, right? These are
they're not options, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these are imperative. I mean, whenever you see that word go, that's clear that God, Jesus is calling us to do it. And then he follows that up with, in John 14, in a couple of places, whoever has my commands and obeys them, he it is that loves me. And so I would say, obviously you're a faithful follower of Jesus, but if we kind of, I don't want to say reverse engineer it, but if we say, if it is that when we follow the commands of Jesus and obey them, that's how we show Jesus we love him. If we're not obeying them, there just might be a missing piece in that faithful following, right?
I think you're being far too kind. I would have just said no. Listen, I've just been in the local church for so long, and I know you have too, is that there's a lot of people who are watching Jesus and think they're following. But if you want to be following Jesus, you have to obey his commands, including the disciple-making command. Mm-hmm. Now, you're a much kinder human than I am. So I'll let the Holy Spirit convict them, and them and the Lord can figure it out.
Why is living into the fullness of Jesus's commands so important? What are they missing out on if they're not making disciples?
Ooh, that's a great question. Obviously, given this John 14 command, John 14:21, where he says, "Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he it is that loves me." So if you're oh, and by the way, the sentence that follows it is, so whoever has my commands and obeys them, he it is that loves me. Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and manifest myself to him. So it does certainly seem like there's going to be Jesus's love partially missing from your life. Whoever Jesus loves, God also loves that person, and so there's some of that's missing, and so maybe that would then be preventing people from a deepness and a richness in that relationship that they would, I think another way to say that another way to say that is that they're missing out on the fullness of life with Christ. Yeah, that's right. And
they're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, that's right. And Tony, I think also just in the book, it was sort of an interesting process. So on one hand, you can see it. It's not a thick book. It's 190 pages. I'm really trying to break this process down to what I would call kind of the lowest common denominator. So if you've not done this before, I want to help you to be able to, to start. And so this isn't a 400-page volume or, whatever. But it was interesting in this process of trying to break it down to the simplest level. The flip side of it is, you really do. So in one of the chapter 2 is just called "Prepare Yourself to Make Disciples." And so you really do have to have a pretty vibrant walk with Jesus to be able to then invest in the lives of other Christians, right? Kind of this idea that you can't give to someone something that you don't already have. And so, if you're not making disciples, you're probably not prepared yourself. I mean, your walk with the Lord is not, potentially where it should be. And so there's kind of that part that's missing, right? But then also, I mean, it's kind of like what I say a lot about people that have a heart for evangelism and people that don't. It is when you prepare yourself to maybe share the gospel for the first time. I mean, you really do have to know it pretty well and believe it for you then to be able to communicate it to somebody else, right? And so, I mean, you have to have been living it, the gospel, and knowing its benefit for your life and what Christ has done for you to be able to share it with others. And so I would think disciple making is kind of the same thing, because when you're disciple making, you have to know about the process of assurance of salvation, and you probably have to have already been doing some scripture memory, and you have to, gone through a process of taming the tongue, and so it's just, again, that deepness you're probably missing, because you're not, because whenever you share anything with anyone else, you have to have some level of understanding about it, right? I don't know if that exactly makes sense, but
it does. I think
certainly if you're not experiencing it, if you're not preparing yourself to share it, you're probably not experiencing all that yourself.
Yeah, the best way to master material is to teach it. Mm-hmm. I think that makes perfect sense. As this book begins to kind of find its way out into the world, right? Mm-hmm. And it's this has been a passion for you. It's been a labor of love for you. Mm-hmm. What's the prayer that's associated with this book? My community here loves to pray. They love to pray for specific things. What specifically can they pray for?
So you can be praying for those people who, pick up the book for the first time, but have not been disciple making in the past. Obviously, you can tell that I have a real heart for those people because, man, as you mentioned, Tony, disciple making can be hard, right?
Sure.
And so I think the hardness makes it not unattainable, but not as interesting, to people.
Yeah, it certainly feels arduous, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so for those people that go, man, I just know I'm supposed to be doing this, but I don't have any idea how. Lord, just help me to, start the process. So I would definitely, I'm praying for those people myself. And so you definitely can be praying for those people. And then, I think I have given someone who does want to start doing this, a pretty good guide. Of course, it's no book is ever going to be perfect, right? But my real deep heart was to not leave any major part of this disciple making process out. And so then as those people begin going through the book, again, I'm praying for this. And so I would ask others just to be praying that God would guide them through it, and whatever parts maybe, again, I don't know of any major parts that I've missed, but if I have missed any, that the Holy Spirit would just sort of guide them through that and get them to the next stage. Right. So I think those would be two really good ones, I think, for people to be praying about.
Now I have one more question for you.
Okay.
But before we get to it, I know that my audience is going to want to find you all over the interwebs. Where is the best place to learn all things Mike and 1-8 Catalyst?
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of two main areas. So obviously our ministry, our website is just 18catalyst.org. The 1 and the 8 are spelled out in word form. And so you can go there and find, I also have a podcast, and we've got a YouTube channel and all that stuff. And then I'm mainly on Facebook and Twitter in terms of social media. And so my handle there is just Mike on Mission, all kind of squished together, so they can find me there.
That's perfect. And you are a ministry that's completely supported by the generosity of other Christians and people who are found on that. So I want to encourage you guys, if you haven't, if you're thinking about your year-end giving, don't sleep on the idea of giving to 1-8 Catalyst and the work that they're doing around the world. That's one of the ways that you can support making disciples in other countries. So please consider that. Okay, last question I love to ask people, and I think you've probably heard it before. It's an advice question where you go back and give yourself one piece of advice. And I want to take you back to the end of your very first day as a missionary for 1-8 Catalyst. It's brand new ministry. You're doing the thing. You're out there. You're raising support. You're figuring out what God's calling you to. If you could pull up a chair in front of that younger version of yourself, look him in the eyes, and give him one piece of advice, what are you going to tell him?
That's really a good question. Boy. So, I would say probably something along the lines of, what comes to my mind at first is something about trust the process, but it really is more sort of a trust, in what God is doing. Because really that initial process of going from, doing ministry in China to this new thing that we're starting, there just could have been a lot of, like, when the Bible translation process just really didn't work out. it could have been easy to just give up on that and, just go off and do, so I don't know what else I would do, but go off and do something else. And so I say, just kind of hang in there and allow God to, to guide and direct you and sort of just, stay the course.
I love it. That's good. Good words. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your generosity, for being a supportive friend, for all the work that you're doing in disciple making. I just want you to know I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony, for having me. It's been fun.
What a fun conversation. I love Mike's heart for the Great Commission. I love his heart for Jesus. And of course, for all that we can do to make disciples. It's such a practical conversation. I really appreciate you guys being a part of it. Do me a favor, go follow Mike on all the socials. Let him know that you heard him here on the Reclamation Podcast. And together, you and I can continue to live out the Great Commission every single day. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this community. And remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.